At IDMA, every set of creative assets we launch or test in an ad account serves a very specific and strategic purpose. Our objective isn't just to produce another winning ad, it's also to validate our assumptions about the market and determine whether our theories are true or not. Believe it or not, the worst thing that could happen is to stumble upon a winning ad and not know why it's working. So in this video, I'll briefly explain how to conduct ad creative testing the right way and provide actionable steps you can adopt to improve your creative testing efforts. But before we do that, who am I and why am I qualified to tell you all this information? My name is Iredia and I'm the founder of IDMA, which is a growth consulting and management firm for e-commerce and direct-to-consumer brands. At IDMA, we simply help e-commerce brand owners grow their e-commerce brand to multiple 7 or 8 figures a year by implementing our growth infrastructure into their businesses and managing it on their behalf. In other words, we partner with brand owners and take care of the marketing and sales department within their business to make it inevitable for them not to achieve profitable, predictable, and sustainable growth with the brand. Okay, cool. So I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm going to go through 4 things. Number 1, what ad creative testing is. 2, the purpose of ad creative testing. 3, actionable steps to conduct ad creative testing the right way. And 4, I'll go through an example, right? A practical example. So number 1, the first thing is, right, I'm gonna say this first. When we're advertising is a game of essentially making bets, right? But it's not just bets, it's calculated bets, right? And when I mention bets, I know a lot of brand owners are gonna be like, wow, if we're making bets, we're essentially gambling, right? But it's not gambling, right? Because it's slightly different. The reason it's different is because gambling is where you take money, you cross your fingers and hope for the best. You hope you win. You hope you make money. You're taking money to the casino and you have no control of the outcome, right? So you're hoping you win. With advertising, we're actually collecting data, making an assumption and testing or validating that assumption. So we have reason to make that bet, right? Whereas with gambling, you're just putting money down with no reason. You're just hoping to get lucky. You're hoping for the best, right? And that's different between gambling and advertising. With advertising, it's a logical process, right? You're collecting data, you're doing research, and you're finding out stuff, and you have reason to believe that making a bet or making this assumption makes sense and will positively affect your business, right? So you're making an assumption, so you're collecting data, making an assumption and validating that assumption. With advertising. With gambling, you just hope you're spending money and hoping for the best, right? So it's similar, but it's not the same thing, right? And this is why you'll never find a marketer that gets a winning ad every single time, because when you're advertising, you're making an assumption, right? You know, there's no guarantee of being right every single time. So you won't find an advertiser that creates winning ads every single time, because there's no guarantee, of getting a winning ad every single time, right? You're making an assumption at the end of the day, right? And this is why you might feel like it's gambling, even though it's not gambling. It's similar to gambling, but it's not, right? Now, that said, with that context in place, we now that we've established that advertising is a game of making bets, but calculated bets, not just random bets and hoping for the best. It's a calculated bet, right? It's a calculated bet, right? Now that we've established that, what is actually creative testing? What's ad creative testing? Well, ad creative testing, obviously, if we're going to look at the logical definition, will be the process of testing ad creatives. But in reality, what we're really doing, like I just said, is validating or testing our assumptions. So ad creative testing is the process of testing or validating our assumptions, right? So that's what ad creative testing is the process of testing and validating our assumptions. Now, the next thing is the purpose of ad creative testing, right? The purpose of ad creative testing ultimately is to make more money, right? But let's get more specific, right? So for example, you might think that a particular sales angle will appeal to a larger market segment. So what you might do is create ad creatives that appeal to that highlight that sales angle that you think is going to appeal to a larger market segment. So that's what you're going to do. So if you think, which is an assumption, if you assume that a particular sales angle is going to appeal to a larger market segment, then you might create ad creatives, right, that highlight that specific sales angle to appeal to a larger market segment, right? So you're testing your assumption. You have an assumption and you're testing it. Another case might be where you might be targeting a product aware audience, right? And you think that by making a small change or a small iteration to your current ads, you might be able to generate sales more efficiently. So you make an iteration or you make a change to your current ads to test that assumption, to see if you're right, to see if that small iteration or that small change will lead to a more efficient return on your money, right? So another example, that's two examples. Another example might be like you might have a proven core ad concept as a static image, but you think that by having a video version of that core ad concept, you might be able to get better results. Again, you have an assumption and you're testing that assumption to see if you're right. You're trying to validate that assumption. Again, you might run a test where you have, a static image ad, right, of a particular core ad concept, and you might have a video version of that same core ad concept, but in video format, right? So again, you're seeing which one performs the best, right? Right, and which one gets you the best results. Again, in these three cases, all you're doing is testing and validating an assumption that you've made, right? And you're doing that obviously to make more money, right? So that's why I say ultimately the whole purpose of ad creative testing is to make more money, right? And I give you three different examples, right? So now that's it. What's the process of actually conducting an ad creative test? Right. Well, the process is very simple, right? We can break this down into 5 steps. The first one is the main thing that makes it different from gambling. This is why advertising is not gambling. The first one is audience research. You need to get a deep understanding of your target audience. Who are you going after? The better you understand your target audience, the higher the chances of actually getting a winning ad. Only if you know your target audience, you're gonna be able to create ads that resonate with them, because you're gonna know what they care about. You're gonna know them, their frustrations, their pain points, their desires, the false beliefs. You're gonna know them. As people, so you're gonna be able to target them, right, in your ads. And now I've made a video on like a very deep, in detail, like an in-depth breakdown of how to conduct audience research, right? I'll leave a link in the description for that video. Now, the second step, so the first one is audience research, right? I'll leave a link to the video that I made on audience research in the description. The second step is essentially coming up with a hypothesis, right? So that's your assumption, right? This is what gives the test a clear objective, right? Because without a hypothesis, why are we doing this test? And this is the big mistake that most brand owners actually make. Like, they'll be testing ads, but whether they get a winning ad or they get an ad that doesn't perform, they don't learn anything, because they weren't looking to learn anything. They were gambling. They were creating ads, launching it, and hoping for the best. They were gambling. They weren't looking to learn something from the test, from launching the ad. Every ad that we launch at IDMA, we're trying to learn something from it. If we get a winning ad, great. If an ad doesn't perform, great. We know something. We've learned something, because every single time we test something, we have a hypothesis. So we're trying to validate our assumptions. It's a logical process. So if we get an ad that doesn't perform, worst case scenario, we get an ad that doesn't perform, great. Now we know that whatever the assumption was, whatever the hypothesis is wrong, right? If we thought that a particular core ad concept, or a particular sales angle, whatever the case may be, a particular thing was the case, and then we test it and we find out that that's not the case, well, great. We know now. We've tested it and that's not the case. Now we learn something, so we don't make that same mistake again in the future, right? So anyways, second step is come up with a hypothesis, right? This is what gives you essentially an objective for the test, right? And a hypothesis essentially is an assumption that you make based on the research that you've done, right? Which is why research comes first. Research, make a hypothesis. The third step is to essentially have a KPI in mind. So what are we tracking? What metric are we going to use to validate our assumptions? Now, for most advertisers that are leveraging paid social, the main metric that they're probably looking at, if they're looking for efficiency, is the CPA, which is cost per acquisition. That's the main metric they're going to be essentially optimizing for, right? Not optimizing for, but that's the metric that they're going to be looking at to see how efficiently they're generating sales, not acquiring customers, because in e-com, you don't acquire customers, you generate sales, you encourage sales. But that's a different topic for another day. The point I'm trying to make here is the main KPI, the main metric that you're probably going to be tracking to see if you're looking for efficiency, if that's what you're looking for, if that's what your hypothesis is around, more efficiency, then you got to be tracking CPA as a direct response advertiser on a paid social platform, right? You're going to be looking at CPA. So that could be your CPA, right? So how efficiently can I generate sales, right? So you have to have that KPI in mind. Then obviously so that's the third step. So we have audience research, hypothesis, right? Come up with a hypothesis, right? Which gives you a clear objective. And then 3, have a KPI in mind. What KPI, what metric are we going to use to validate our assumption, which is in most cases CPA for most direct response marketers, right? Because they're trying to gauge efficiency, right? Of sales, right? Of generating sales, right? And then the 4th step is obviously to run the test, right? And the 5th step is to analyze the results. So where was the ad that you launched more efficient than your current control ad? Like, what was the outcome, right? So you have to analyze the results, and you're validating that assumption based on that KPI that we decided on, right? On step 3, right? So that's like the 5 steps: audience research, hypothesis. The 3rd step is KPI, so finding a key performance indicator, so a metric that you're going to be tracking. And the 4th step is actually launching the ads, the test, conducting the test. And the 5th step is analyzing results, right? And learning from it, and getting learnings, right? We're not just trying to get winning ad, we're trying to learn something from every single test, right? So that's the 5 steps. As I said, if you want to know how we conduct audience research, I'll leave a link in the description for that video. That said, I'll give you a quick example right now, so you guys can know how to actually follow this simple 5-step process, right? Let's say for example you sell, I don't know, chips. Let's say you sell chips, snacks, whatever the case may be. You sell snacks, right? And you want to target a Gen Z audience, so kids. You want to target a younger demographic, right? And then you go and do your research, and then you find out that the younger demographic, for example, spend like 5 hours on TikTok every day, right? So you learn from your research that a Gen Z audience, that demographic, spends 5 hours on TikTok a day, right? Which is very realistic, by the way, right? That may well be the case. Just an example. That may well be the case, right? So you find out that they spend 5 hours on TikTok every day, and then you also learn about their music preferences. They might listen to pop a lot. So you find out that maybe, 82% of Gen Z audiences listen to pop music, right? So then based on that research, you come up with a hypothesis. So we've done the research, and we find out that this Gen Z audiences spend 4 to 5 hours a day on TikTok, and their number one genre, right? The genre of music that they like is pop music, right? So we found out those 2 data points, right, from our research. Now, obviously, the second step is coming up with a hypothesis, and the hypothesis could be, well, if I run an ad campaign, or if I run an ad on TikTok with, Ed Sheeran, for example, running an ad with Ed Sheeran on TikTok because they spend 4 to 5 hours on TikTok and they like pop. If I run a campaign with Ed Sheeran on TikTok, then I'm going to be able to, that will lead to incremental sales for the business, right? So that's your hypothesis. So the 3rd step now is, well, what's the KPI? The 3rd step is, identifying the KPI. What are you going to track to validate this hypothesis, right? So the hypothesis is having an ad with Ed Sheeran on TikTok will lead to incremental sales, right? So the KPI that we're tracking is incremental sales, obviously, right? Because that's what we're tracking. That's what we're gonna use to validate. Do we get more sales by having Ed Sheeran in our marketing mix or not, right? So that's the 3rd step. So the 4th step is obviously, like I said, conducting the test. So the 1st step is audience research. 2nd step is hypothesis. 3rd step is the KPI, which is the incremental sales. And the 4th step is actually conducting the test. Then you run the campaign with Ed Sheeran eating the chips on TikTok, right? Whatever the case may be, whatever the ad is, cool. You run the campaign on TikTok. And the 5th step is obviously analyzing the results. And what you're doing here, also before we get into the analyzing results, what you might want to do if you were actually carrying out this campaign, you would actually want to keep everything else in terms of your marketing the same, right? The only thing that changes is the Ed Sheeran initiative. You want to keep every single other variable the same, so that if you do get incremental sales, you know that it came from the campaign with Ed Sheeran. All the independent variables, all the things that could essentially affect incremental sales, all the other things that essentially could have an effect on incremental sales, you should keep them the same. The only thing that we're changing here is the campaign with Ed Sheeran. So you have to run this like a scientific experiment. You know what I'm saying? Like so the only thing that's changing here is the initiative within Ed Sheeran. Everything else in terms of your marketing should stay the same, because if you don't, you won't know what actually caused the incremental lift in sales, if you do have an incremental lift in sales, right? So you need to have every other variable or every other independent variable the same. Just keep it the same, not change anything about it, right? The only thing that's changing is the Ed Sheeran campaign, right? The Ed Sheeran ad that you're launching, right? So that we can know it's a fair test, right? Anyways, so step 5. So 4, you conduct a test, right? You keep everything the same apart from the campaign with Ed Sheeran. And then step 5, you analyze the results, right? And that's how you successfully conduct a test. And you should be doing this with every single round of ad creatives that you launch. You're trying to learn something. You're trying to gain insight or learn something from everything, from every test that you run. You shouldn't just be launching ads randomly. And the reason I wanted to make this video quickly as well is because I've seen a lot of videos recently on that are to do with the meta updates of Andromeda and all these AI new features and AI updates that Meta has introduced to the platform, right? Everybody's talking about launch 1 million ads, launch 1,000 ads. Like, cool, yeah, but we're trying to learn something. We're not just, again, it's not a game of let's launch ads and let's hope that we get one winning ad. That's not the game that we're playing here. That's ridiculous. At that point, we're just gambling. We're not trying to play a game of throwing ads at Facebook and then hoping that one of them hits. No, we still need to be logical about it. we can't just be creating ads and launching it and hoping that we get one that wins and that we get a lot. We make a lot of sales from. That's not how this works. We still have to be logical about it, and sensible, right? The amount of ads that we test might increase, but we still want to learn something from each round of ads that we launch into the ad account. Okay, so now that you know how we conduct ad creative tests, you might want to know how we create the ad creatives, high converting ad creatives in the first place. And that's why I created this video right here. Make sure you click it or tap it.